Welcome to yet again our lessons on HTML, but today we'll be looking at HTML forms. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, now we are saying a web form or HTML form on the web page allows the user to enter data that is sent to the server for processing. Okay, so web users fill out the forms using the text fields, as which you will see later on in the lesson. Then you are going to also look at radio buttons and also see how we can use checkboxes. Okay, now one of the important elements is the form element. Okay, now this is a container for different types of elements, if I may say, because elements like the input elements and the label, they all fall under the form element. Okay, now one of the elements, like I said earlier on, is the label element, and you are saying this defines the label for many form elements. Okay, then for the input element, now this is the most common used element. Okay, now this depends on different attributes that people would have inserted in the program. Okay, but what is most important that people should know that is the input element. It's an element that's very important and is used depending on the attributes that people may insert. Okay, now here we have got a description showing the type of element that we have. Here we've got input element, and the type of this particular element is a text type. Okay, now if it's a text type, we are saying it displays a single line text input field. If the type of course this is an input element. Now if its type is radio, it means that you are using it for selecting one of many choices. Like if your type is for checkbox, it simply means that you are selecting the zero or more of many choices that you have created. Then if you say submit, you're actually just submitting your form to the server, if you have a server, that is. And for a button, this one is for a clickable. You select that particular display part that you have created. So the button is used for a clickable part. Okay, now let's look at the text fields, what is contained. Okay, now a text fields are one line areas that allow the user to input text. Okay, single line text input controls are created using an input element whose type attributes has a value of text. Okay, so an example is given here, but let's focus our attention on how it actually is created. We have, of course, our opening form element. Okay, where now the label and input are all this one is a container, as we looked at it earlier on. So under its container, we have got this label element and the input element. Now for the label element, we have got a field or a text field that is very important, that is the for field. Okay, now this one, it's simply you're trying to explain to say what type of the label are you trying to push into. So if you say username, meaning also only on the content aspect, it must correspond. So username, this label is for the username, also the content must be the username. Now under input, there are three most important text fields that people should note. You've got the type, the name, and the ID. The type, the name, and the ID. Okay, now for the type, this particular type, remember we said there are different types. It could be a button, it could be submit, for what, but for this particular example, is a type of a text. Okay, now the name should correspond with the label, what is meant for. So the name is for username, and the ID, the identification, is for a username. Okay, so the ID should correspond with the name that you are giving it. Okay, so basically that's that. Now let's see actually what happens in this particular item. Okay, I've just popped up my today I'm using Sublime text. You can use Visual Studio Code if you want. Then on my right, I've just popped up my browser which I'm using, and if you notice, this is the title is the HTML forms. Equally here is HTML forms browser. All right, so we go ahead and see how we can. Now you look at the structure. There's something missing here, and that's the body tag and the closing tag for the body. Okay, there we are. So now let's try to see how we can actually show forms. Okay, so we are saying the first thing that happens is the form label, and the immediately I do this, Sublime gives me the opening and the closing tag. Okay, so the next thing I'll need is the label now. Okay, so for the label, okay, let me just say name for now. Okay, name, then let me say input. Okay, that is another element after the form, the label, then the input. Okay, let me not add any attribute for now. Let's see what happens on this one. Okay, let me add another label here. let me use the one for password. Okay, password. Let me insert an input, also an element for input. Okay, now let me use a button and see how the button also would work. Okay, here we are. I'll use the one for submit. Okay, right, now let's see how this one actually pops out. Okay, now this, yes, there we are. So if I was to save this and show it here, we'll have something that pops up. Okay, and if you write something here, okay, password, but you notice on submit, okay, yes, you have we don't have a server currently that is created, so it's just like loading onto the same PC here, but don't have the main server that can actually submit our work. But so basically that's how the appearance of a form would appear, name and some pad and the like. Now there's something interesting here for the password. We'll see as we look at its text fields. Okay, because one thing which is most important is that for a password, a password should not be seen to people when you enter it. It should be some hidden characters. So a password and text fields will be different as we go into this. Now I just want to change the layout. I'm not comfortable really on how this is appearing. Let me add space, and also you can actually, if you wish to add some space or maybe make it such a way that it be comfortable for you, you can actually use the break and the div for dividing the tags. Okay, so let me just use the break here together with the div. Now the div there's a closing tag, so I will set my closing tag here, then I will set another break here and add another div. Okay, then let me close it here, then let me add another break. Okay, and then another div. Okay, then I close it. Okay, so if I was now save this and show it on my browser, we'll have some nice layout, and the space you can actually see that it's detached. So that would be that. Let me also add the button for reset. Okay, for reset. Now for reset, I'll go ahead and also type the this is type. Okay, because for the text, for the reset, I would want it to by default to go back to its original state. Okay, so I will say type, okay, then equals to, then I'll say reset. Okay, then I would say, let me just close this here. Okay, then I'll say reset. Okay, then I'll have now a closing tag for a button. There we are. Okay, so my work, I would want, when I want to go back to my state, for example, if I was to do this, I'll have my reset button here. So if I was to type something here, then maybe I've made a mistake, I would reset it back by default to its original aspect. So that's what happens. So the reset can be, it's a good thing that you can actually add to your program. All right, now let's now try to add some fields. Okay, some text fields to our elements here. Okay, let's go to the label. Okay, so one of the text fields you can use for the label, it's the for. Okay, so the for, it's used for if you want to explain or showcase what this particular item is all about. So the label is meant for what? So I would say in this case, let me say it's meant for a name, right? So the label, the content and the label should match. The name and the content should match. Now for the input, the text fields, remember we said there are three: the type, the name, and the ID. So the type, what type of text is this? I mean of data is this? Okay, I'll say it's for a text, right? How about the input? How about the name? Let me just click this one. How about the name? So the name we are saying it has to correspond with the label which is meant for. So the name for name, also the name is for name. Then the other one, the ID also should correspond with the name. so the ID is name. Okay, now for password you can also say this one is made for say password. Okay, now for the input under password we won't write as text. Okay, of course you say type. Now this one is a password. Okay, now it's different because for a password like I said earlier on, the characters are hidden, so I don't want actually to be seen. Of course, that this one for the name field, yes, it will be available. Okay, and it also match with the label which is meant for, so it's the password. But I won't include the identification because password to be different. Okay, and you won't be the same match with what will be written there. So what you're saying is the type of this particular one is not text form, but it's different from text and password because the characters here are hidden. Okay, so if I was to now save this information and show it on my, of course nothing will happen, but as you enter your data, for example, let me give a name here. Okay, now as you enter your password, you notice that the characters actually will be hidden. Previously the way it was showing, so if I enter something here, you notice that now the characters are hidden. Okay, but if you wish to see them, you can actually uncheck that, but the password is created for people don't actually see. Okay, so if you want, you can submit the same information. Now there are certain attributes that you can actually add. There are certain attributes that you can actually add to your input element. Okay, one of them is the required. Now for the required, this one, it's used when you want to force or you want to make sure that that particular form, that component where you want your users to fill in, they do not ignore it. If you tell them, if you write required, you are simply commanding them to answer that particular form on that aspect we have written. So you say required, meaning that you are forcing them to actually answer that part. The form won't be completed if they have not inserted on that particular part. So if you type required, you are actually commanding them, say no, this particular part needs to be entered. Okay, so for example here I've just written required. Okay, so what it means that if I were to save this, okay, and if I was now to go on my text here on my browser, sorry, nothing happens, but let me ignore this part because this part needs to be required. I've commanded to be required. Let me just go ahead and type in my password, then I try to submit. So you notice that now the browser says no, this one has been commanded that it must be filled in, otherwise it won't work. So now if I go here now and type something, let's say Sarah for example, that's when it can actually be submitted because I've made that one a requirement. Similarly, if I come here, let me just do this one. If I come here on password, I write required, it is still just use small letters, it still work. Okay, so as long as you have just commanded, you say no, I want this part to be written, it actually be the case. So this one, let me say Jack. Okay, there we are. Then let me ignore it, so it's equally depending on that, and until when I write that particular part, that's when I actually if you want to reset it, you can revert back. If you want to submit, you can submit. So basically that's how it can happen. Now apart from the required attribute, you can also use other attribute which you would want to add to your element, to your input element. Okay, now one other is the what we call as the placeholder attribute. Okay, now for the placeholder attribute, what simply means here is that it's just a guide. Okay, it's a guide to your audience or to your users or the people who wish to answer that particular form. Okay, it's a guide to show them, say no, here you type like this. For example, you can say okay, type placeholder, okay, or placeholder. Okay, then you say placeholder. Okay, then you say I want the placeholder here to be name of user, for example. So when you write like this, okay, when you load it on your browser, okay, the name, this particular part, name of user, it will be visible, but immediately your users which wish to enter that, it won't affect their their writing or their inputs. Okay, it will disappear, but it's just a guide to show them where they're supposed to be. So if I was to save this and show it on my browser now, okay, you notice that the name of user. Now if you come now here and click, and if you want to type something, say Monga, it disappears. Okay, so it's just a guide to show people actually how it can, you are directing people where to write in short. So you can use the place value if you wish to. Okay, now apart from the place value, there's one other attribute that you can actually use, okay, and that is the value. Okay, the value attribute. Now for the value attribute, it's different from the placeholder. The placeholder is just like a guide. It's just some form of letting people to know where they are. But if you are going to use the value attribute, that particular key word that you enter, it will be there all the time. For example, you say username, okay, then you save this, okay, and if you have to test it now on the browser, okay, you have to, and if you wish to type, the username will be there. At the end of the day, it won't be smart. But if you wish, maybe let's say if you are just targeting mail, you are doing a research or conducting a form for mails only, you can use the value and say, okay, this one is for mails and you want them to do it quicker, okay, Mr. And if you do this, it's easier for males to actually go. I see with the females, and if you want to load this, they'll just go ahead and write their surnames and what was depending. You can use this. So basically, that's one other attribute that you can actually use. Okay, now let's add one other text field for email. Okay, if you wish to show a label for email, we see how we can actually use it. So let me just insert one other for email. Let me do it here. Okay, so yet again I'll use the break, okay, so that is also the divide. Okay, so there we are. Now label, because I want to state the one for email. Okay, so label for what? We'll say this one is for email. Okay, then we'll say this one is for email. Okay, it has to match with what you are giving it. Okay, for the for and the I mean for what, for email, and yet the content must be for email, so it has to match, right? Then we close with the tag for label. Next thing here, it is that we're going to use the input. Okay, so input. Okay, so now if you click on input, by default they would come to say the fields, the type and the name appears. So what type is this particular element? This one is an email. Let me select it here. Okay, equally on the name, it has to correspond what the label is meant for, so it's also an email. Okay, now let me add my ID, because I want also my ID to be to match with my name, so we can include ID here and say email. Okay, so you can actually add that, right? So if you now were to save this, and run it, okay, yeah, let me just add a break here. Reset and submit is not appealing. Let me just do this. Okay, where are we? Oh yeah, just a closing tag. A closing tag will do. Yes, there we are. Okay, so if I was to save this and try to run it here, all right, we'll actually see that something is fine. All right, so I've got our name there. Now there's something that is interesting about the email text field. For this particular one, you know, if you don't follow the standard way of writing an email, it won't work. What do I mean? For example, okay, let me give James here a name. Okay, then I give character as a password. Then let me just write some letters. I've ignored the art. Okay, and if I try to submit, there will be a problem. The browser will say no, the art is missing. Okay, so until when you write the art, that's when you can actually say, oh yeah, I think this one, that's when it can actually work. Okay, so if you now say okay, art, you just include art and you type something, yes, it will be submitted, or it will go through. All right, now let's look at the other text field that we can actually the other label that we can actually use for the let's use the other one for number if you wish to insert some numbers or characters. Okay, so let's add another label here for number. Okay, another label here, and then, okay, that you are saying this particular label will say let me just come here. Okay, if we do it in advance, okay, I would say age. Let me just make it for age. Then here I'll say this one is for age. Okay, so I've got our text field for, this is for age, and I've got the content which is matching with the age. All right, now the next thing is what is the input. Okay, so I've got our inputs here. Okay, now for input there must be a type, okay, and the name and the ID. Very important, those three particular fields. So name, okay, then type. Okay, what type is this one? Now this one is not a text but actually a number, right? So if it's a number that you're looking at, and what is its name? Okay, remember you say the name corresponds to what you have given it in the label. So the name, it's age, okay, and the ID also corresponds with the name, which is also age. Okay, and then if you are to close this one out, okay, if I were to close this one out and see how it can fit, let me just check. Let me add the break so that also my work is nicely presented. Okay, so if I do this, okay, there we are. So label for age, okay, then the input, the type is the number, the name is the age, and the ID also is the age. Okay, so I have to save this now and show it here. Okay, we have our age, and you can actually see that there's even some arrows we can actually add the age of those particular numbers. Okay, you can have age of 20 or what. But I should also mention that there are some attributes that you can actually add on age. Okay, one of them is the mean. Okay, maybe say you're trying to carry out a research on a particular age group. Okay, you would say no, I would want my my age group between maybe 20 years, or maybe say maximum should be maybe 45. Now how do you show that? Okay, so you go on your name, soon after the ID and the age here, okay, you can type and say mean. Okay, so if you type mean, okay, now what will be your age limit? You say okay, I'll make it 20. What will be your maximum? Okay, you can say max. Max is a short phrase for maximum. Okay, then you can say max, I'll say it's 45, because that's the maximum, right? So if now if you have to save this, maybe one of your users who has visited your site goes in, of course, writes everything here, password, enters the email, enters at what, writes. Now when you reach the age, if you say 67, then if you submit, it will refuse. Why? Because the value is it should be less. Okay, it should be 20 and less than 45. Okay, so if you now say 38, that's when it can agree and it can submit. Okay, now let's look at one other text field that is for the date. Okay, so let me make another one for label here. Okay, oh sorry, label. Okay, now this one is for the date. Okay, so label, let me just restart it. So I want the Sublime to bring so here we are, the label. Okay, now this one is for the date, or let me say birthday. Let me use for birthday, right? Then this label is meant for you would say, now this one, if you're using for the birthday or some dates, you can actually, because a birthday is, maybe you'd want to say it's what, when you want to fall at which particular time, so it's the date element that we are going to use for this particular one. So you can say this one is for a date, because a birthday falls on a particular day that one would wish to be there, and I have to write for, okay, so equals, then I'll say this one is for a date. Okay, now the input here, okay, the input here, now the input for this particular one, you look at the type, of course, of the type, the name, and the ID. Okay, so the type here, it is date. Okay, so the type here, it's date. Then the name it's the one that is which is appearing on the label, which is the date. So this is date, so just this date. Okay, date, let me just, let us go up. Okay, there we are. So date, then the ID also, it's date. Okay, so that's how you can actually show it. Let me just close with an angle bracket. Okay, and if we are to, did I add the, no, let me just add the break. Okay, let me also add the dev, so that is my work, it's presentable. Okay, also here closing tab. All right, so if I was to do this now, if I was to save, okay, on the browser and see how it can actually work. Okay, there we are, we have our date. Okay, it can actually pop up. You can choose whichever date that you'd wish things to be there. So you can choose which day your birthday falls under, and you can actually, people can choose your particular part. Okay, so that's for the date. Okay, now let's try to look at what other aspect, the other text field, which is how you can use a radio button. Okay, if you want to use a radio. Now for a radio, we did say that these are used to let the user select exactly one option from a predefined, some options. Select one, in short. Okay, you can have some options. Okay, so one would select, for example, you can even choose the one for gender, maybe a boy or a girl. One, of course, there'll be just one option. It's either you're a boy or you're a girl. So for you to do that, you can use the radio button. Okay, now how do you show the radio button? So yet again, let me just add one another label here. I'll say label. Okay, it has popped up. Okay, so for label, what is it meant for? Let me just come here. This one is meant for, let's say, let me use female. Okay, because this one is for female. Okay, female. Definitely here we say female as well. Okay, now our input, what is our input type? Okay, our input type here, it will be radio. Okay, radio, because we're using a radio input. Okay, next is the name. Now the name is just correspond with the label, which is female. Okay, so female, there we are. Then next, the other thing is the ID. Okay, the ID too needs to correspond with the name that you're giving it. Okay, so ID female, sorry, what, female. Okay, then let me just close. Okay, let me check, do I have a put? Yes, there we are. So input type is the radio. Okay, now this one, remember I said this is where you choose one option, either male or female. So if you are to save this now, if you are to save this particular one now and see how it can actually populate here. Okay, you have our female. Okay, So yeah, you have a female which has just popped up there, so you choose. Equally, you can actually, so you can either select boy. Now let's just make it more fun by adding another one. So allow me to copy this. Let me just copy now. Okay, this one I want it to be here. Let me just a minute. Let me just cut this. I want this to be here on its own, and I don't want this layout the way it showed up there. So female. Okay, let me use the break. Let me use the dev. Okay, let me close. Okay, let me just check whether I was not comfortable the way where the female popped up. I would want it to be below. I don't want it to be here. I want it to be below this. So if I was to save this, oh yes, okay. So this is our now. No, now this one is an option. If there is either you're a boy, you're a boy or a girl, or female or male. So let me choose. Let me just insert another one so people can actually, you can create two so people choose one. So this was the one for female. Let me just copy this. Let me just copy this, okay, and create another break first of all, okay, then dev, okay, and dev close, okay. Then in between here I can paste my okay. So here I'm changing, this was female, now I'm inserting it for male. Equally here male, radio here it's male, here also it's male, right? So now if you are to save this and show it on our browser, we actually have two. So now people can actually choose which particular gender they are, whether they are male or female. Okay, so now last but not the least, let's look at the last one for today's lesson, and that is the, let me just sort it here, and that's a checkbox. Okay, now a checkbox allows the user to select one or more options from what you have given the options. One can also choose, you can also use the checkbox. Okay, now how do you show a checkbox? Yet again, we use the label. Okay, label. Now label for what? Okay, now you choose, depends which one you want. For example, let me choose the one for okay, let me use the fruit. Let me say Fruticana. Okay, I've just used Fruticana, a drink. Okay, so this is the drink that I've chosen. Okay, now I also have to say Fruticana. Okay, so Fruticana, and I have to have a closing tag for the label. Okay, so there we are. Okay, this is the closing tag. Okay, so label for Fruticana. Okay, then I've got the content Fruticana. That is just the drink that I've picked. Okay, we're going to say Fruticana drink. Okay, yeah, it's fine like this. So it's okay. Fruticana. That's the content, and the label is the same. Next, it's the input. Okay, so for the input. Now for the input, yet again, we can have the three texts which will be very common as we do this: the type, the name, and the ID. The type, the name, and the ID. So you mean after the input, then you will type, okay, equals to, and what did we say? We say the type. In this particular time, you're not using a text, you're not using a radio, but you're using a what? A checkbox. Okay, so the type of this particular field is a checkbox. Okay, and what is the name? Now the name should correspond with a label. Okay, and this one now we are saying it's what? It's Fruticana. Okay, Fruticana. So it's matching with the label you have given it. Okay, then the ID also. Okay, the ID is now also Fruticana. It must match. Okay, there we are. It does. Okay, so the ID Fruticana. Now if I was to save this, and did I enter the let me just enter the break so that this I can have a nice layout. can have a nice layout of work. Okay, then let me have a closing tag. All right, there we are. So label for Fruticana, that is the one. Maybe someone would want to choose this particular drink, so you can actually do that. Okay, so if I was to actually, let me add another one. Let me just add another label here. Let me just copy this. Let me just copy this and add another break here. Add another div. The one I work to be. I can also add a closing tag in ahead and come and copy this. Okay. Now, this time around, I would want, let's say, I would want Fanta. Okay, equal here Fanta. Okay, it's a checkbox, yes, but this one should match with my label. So Fanta equal on the ID Fanta. Right, so there we are. Now if I was to save this and test it on my my browser here, I'll have Fanta, and you can actually see that now you can, and there's a checkbox, there's even a tick if you are male or female, if you are, your age is what, and some that you can actually add on the age. There's one attribute that we can also use. Let me just, where is the age, the number, okay, just go up. Okay, you can also add attribute which is known as the step. Okay, now for a step, you are choosing how you want to count the numbers. Maybe you count, let's say 20. I would say let me count in 10. Okay, if you say 10, so it will be counting in tens. Let me just save this and show you what we're trying to say here. So save this. Okay, so let's say name Muzoga, for example. Then password, we enter our password. Okay, email, okay, Muzoga at pppp. Okay, then age. Now here, maybe let's say you say 20, and if you wish to count, maybe you want to add the years, it will add, since you have written a 10 here, it is going to count in tens. Okay, so if you are to say now, if you were to jump, it will be 30. If you were to jump, it will be 40. So that's what we mean by this. So here you can go ahead and check, and if you want Fruticana or Fanta, people, you can save this. So basically that's what is there. So today's lesson, we're just basically looking at forms, how we can actually add forms, and these forms, they have got text fields. Actually, how can you can add them? Okay, so one can use radio buttons, one can use the checkbox, depending on what type of data you want to use. You can, if you're choosing number, that's you can insert it. If you're using the email text field, you should know how to insert the email. If it's the password, you should know how to go about the password. And there are other attributes that you can actually add to your collection. So basically that's what we had for today as lesson. Thank you for listening.